Since this e4 pawn is undefended, so that's why here black immediately takes on e4, which is called Rio Gambit Accepted. And now here black can capture this knight on e5, but instead he decides to develop his bishop to e7 so that he can castle. Here white is preparing for knight to d5, attacking this bishop, so that's why here black immediately pushed c6, stopping the move knight d5. And now here black can play this amazing move f5, directly launching a pawn march, and then black can reroute his knight to f7 and then g5, attacking this queen. But after queen to f3, here black decides to bring his knight to e8 so that he can reroute it to g7 square. And now here black have multiple options like h4, so that he can pin this queen and this rook by this bishop to g4. Or black can also go for bishop to g5, providing this bishop a very strong diagonal. But instead, here black decides to bring his bishop to d4, covering this very strong diagonal. So that's why here white immediately pushed c3, attacking this bishop. but that's an inaccuracy by this push. This is because you can see that this push blocks the diagonal of this dark square bishop. Instead of this move, here black can consider this move, which is a5, so that he can push this a4, trying to destroy the structure of white. And suppose if game continues like knight to g4, preparing for knight to f6 fork, then simply bishop takes g4, queen takes g4, asking for queen exchange. And if takes, simply rook takes e2, black can exchange the rooks, and after this knight to e6. And now you can see that this position is completely equal. But in the actual game, after c5, but guys, that's not a good move. Instead, he must consider this move, which is c4, trying to create a breakthrough. And if black decides to suppose push, which attacks this knight, then simply knight to d5, preparing for knight to f6. And if takes, asking for queen exchange, takes, rook takes e2, and rook to e8. And instead of exchanging the rooks, here firstly white can push b4, opening the diagonal or of this dark square bishop. Then after takes, now you can see that this diagonal is completely opened, and takes, and at the end you can see that white has two powerful bishops and this passed d pawn, and clearly you can see that now white is much better here. Okay, so in the actual game, after bishop to c1, here black decides to go for bishop to c7, so that he can go through this strong diagonal. And guys, now it's better for black to exchange the rooks. This is because after takes, then he can bring his knight to e6. But instead of playing this move after c4, here black goes for d4. And you can see that this is a mistake. This is because now this light square bishop can easily enter to this e4 square, which attacks this d7 pawn. And after suppose rook to b8, which is actually played in the game, now you can see that white can go for bishop to d5, which attacks this rook as well as creates some pressure over this f7 pawn. But here black decides to go for d3, opening the diagonal for this dark square bishop. And now black have a great option to bring his bishop to a5, which targets this rook and breaking this strong rook battery. But instead he goes for b6, a bad move which blocks this dark square bishop. And after that g3. Now black have multiple options like b5, attacking this pawn chain, or maybe black can push a5, or maybe bishop to d6, which opens the 7th rank for this queen, so that he can keep an eye towards these queen side pawns. But again, instead he made an inaccuracy by playing h5. And now it's better to capture with the g-pawn, but he captured with the knight. And now white decides to bring his bishop to d5, attacking this rook as well as creating some pressure over this f7 pawn. But guys, there is something crazier than this. Instead of targeting this rook and this pawn by moving this bishop to d5, In this position, instead of playing this, here white can actually sacrifice his bishop by bishop takes g6, and obviously you can't capture this with the f pawn because then white will simply capture this rook on e6, and at the end white will be a rook up. And suppose if black captured this with the rook, then most of us will capture this knight on h5 by queen takes h5, which is also fine, but instead of this we can play this amazing move rook to e7, targeting this f7 pawn and this queen, and clearly you can see that there is no defense to protect this for black, and clearly you can see that white is winning. Okay, so in the actual game, after bishop to d5, and the best defense of this move for black is simply bringing this queen to f5, asking for queen exchange, but instead he decides to attack this bishop by playing f6, and now most of us will bring back this bishop. But as I said, this game is very special, and here white decides to sacrifice his rook on e6. He decides to play rook to e6, sacrificing this bishop. And suppose if black captured this bishop, now comes queen to e4, threatening to target this g6 pawn, and if black decides to block it with the knight, this will not gonna work because of rook to e7 check, and black has to lose his queen. So that's why after seeing this all, he decides, after rook to e6, he decides to bring his bishop to e5 so that he can guard this f6 pawn.
Sis.
Okay, so here black sacrificed his knight so that he can bring his rook to h5 by capturing this pawn, and you can see that black is creating some decent pressure towards this king. But guys, in reality this is of no use because black goes for rook to e8, threatening to play rook to g8 check. Another beautiful move by white, creating immense pressure over this g6 pawn. And after this, rook to h2, attacking this queen. But guys, now there are multiple ways to win this game, like queen takes g6 check, But here white decides to finish this in his own style. He captured this g6 pawn by his rook. This is because after rook takes g2 check, in this position the final move by white is rook takes g2, and in this position Pillsbury resigned. This is because now this queen is pinned, so that's why black is forced to capture this bishop. But after that you can see that white is a rook up and in completely dominating position. And guys, if you like this video, please make sure to hype this video so that we can bring this game to the hype section. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.